Welcome, Dr. Taej Mundkur, Senior Advisor to Wetlands International, the Netherlands. First of all, on behalf of many Waterbird enthusiasts of India and other countries, I thank you very much. I heartily thank you for sparing time today and accepting my invitation to give this interview on the topic conservation of waterfowl and waterbirds and their habitats on the flyways through India. If you don't mind, Dr. Mundkur, before proceeding further with your interview, I would like to share your very rich profile with our viewers. So can you give me some few minutes for that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Dr. Taej Mundkur is a senior advisor to Wetlands International. He is currently based in the Netherlands. Dr. Mundkur started his career with Wetlands International in 1991 at Malaysia. At that time, it was called Asian Wetland Bureau, which was abbreviated as AWB. And he coordinated the Asian Waterbird Census that time. Dr. Mundkur helped in developing and coordinating the Asia-Pacific Migratory Waterbird Conservation Strategy from 1996 to 2006. It was the largest international cooperation framework for migratory waterbirds and their habitats in the region. Most recently, he served as a senior technical officer of Wetlands International at its global office in the Netherlands and focused on international action for flyway conservation of waterbirds and other biodiversity and management and restoration of wetlands worldwide. He has been coordinating international waterbird census and waterbird population estimations programs and works on several flyway related projects. In the last decade, he has served as counselor for Asiatic fauna to the Convention on Migratory Species Scientific Council and chaired its Flyways working group that developed a global program of work for all migratory birds and their habitats in all flyways worldwide. He briefly helped the UN FAO build a program to strengthen the capacity of veterinarians and wildlife staff in wild bird disease monitoring in Africa. Wild bird monitoring means avian influenza, Africa, Europe, and Asia. So, and very interestingly, Dr. Mundkur holds a PhD in waterbird ecology from Saurashtra University, India. And as I said earlier, today's topic of his interview would be conservation of waterbirds and their habitats on the flyways through India. So first of all, before engaging into the discussion on the main theme of today's interview, our viewers would love to know, how did you start your journey of waterbird conservation? Today, you are a well-known professional in the field of waterbird conservation, but what was the origin and genesis of this professional giant right now we are seeing on this screen? So we would like to know that. Were you an amateur birder in your young days, Dr. Mundkur?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ketan Tatu, for having invited me for this interview. And it's a real pleasure to be here and to speak to you and hopefully an audience who have interest in learning more about wetlands, waterbirds, and what they can do for their conservation. I started, like most children in India, surrounded by nature and domestic nature, cats, dogs, chickens, as well as nearby wetlands and forests where I became interested in nature. I was lucky that in school, one of the many schools I attended around the country, we in Pune, we were close to what became known as the Mula Mudha Bird Sanctuary, and our teacher took us there for nature talks, for learning about birds, and that really helped to spark my interest in birds. And then I actually fell sick once with hepatitis, and I was at home, and I was watching the guava tree outside our window, and it had two tiny birds, different colored birds feeding on them. And I couldn't understand why there were two different colors of birds feeding on one fruit at a time. Fortunately, my grandfather had a copy of the Salim Ali Book of Indian Birds. And so I went down and brought it and spent the rest of the week reading the whole book, actually, and finding out all the interesting things about birds and nature. And I think this together sparked my interest in birds. I went out bird watching when I could with friends, with many mentors who actually helped to make me understand the value of birding and the enjoyment of being out in nature. Even if you didn't see birds, it is great to be out there because there's much more than birds in nature.
Yes, yes. What about your college education, university education? Have you done some wildlife-related course at MSc level or at doctoral level?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I started by studying zoology, botany, and chemistry, and then microbiology. And my interest for my bachelor's and master's focused on microbiology, which is an amazing field in itself. And after I finished that, I realized that, well, I love the micro world, but I want to be out in the real world. And so I was very fortunate that I had an opportunity to come to Gujarat, to Saurashtra University in Rajkot, and do my PhD on the waterbirds of Saurashtra and Kutch and the Gulf of Kutch under late Professor R.M. Nayak, who was a wonderful guide and mentor to me. And I remember the first question he asked me. He says, "Why have you come here? Have you come here for a degree or to do research?"
Great.
I said, "To do research." He said, "Well, if you want a degree, then leave. But if you want to do research, then stay. It will take many years for it, but you'll enjoy it." And that really worked out as he mentioned, because I had the pleasure of working there and doing my research for nearly 7 years and finishing my thesis. In fact, I didn't want to finish my thesis because I was enjoying studying the birds in the freshwater lakes and reservoirs around Rajkot, in Saurashtra, in the Gulf of Kutch. And it was a perfect opportunity. I mean, the nature and the birds and the wetlands of Saurashtra and Kutch was just so special at that time.
Okay. So it's a very good example. Nowadays, everybody is in rush to complete his or her PhD and get a degree. So your case was a bit different. Okay. So
I think the birds dictate the speed at which you can study.
Studying
the nesting ecology of birds, they nest once a year. And as it happened, there were 4 years of drought while I was in Saurashtra, and so my study became quite extended. But actually, that gave me and everyone else some very interesting insights into how do birds adapt to drought conditions. How do they manage to nest? How do they choose their nesting sites? And so I think we have to be a little patient with nature, because it's taken millions of years to evolve, and we can't expect answers in a couple of years.
Yes, I agree, Dr. Mundkur. Coming to our topic of today, my first question, Dr. Taej, there is a word waterbirds in our title, in today's topic's title, and that is, I think, central theme of our today's interview. So what is the exact meaning of this word waterbirds? I'm asking this question for the benefit of young students and researchers. So what do we mean by waterbirds? And I also often come across the terms like waterfowl, wildfowl, and these terms are used very loosely. You know, somebody says waterfowl, and if I was in USA for 3 years, they did not use this term waterfowl very freely. So can you kindly elaborate on these 2-3 terms like waterbirds and waterfowl and wildfowl, all those things? So it will helpful to our young students and many bird watchers who are very keen about birding, but they may not be knowing all these terms exactly. So kindly, can you explain these terms?
Sure, thank you. That's a very good question, and one that's been asked many times because they can be quite confusing. And the answer is actually quite simple. People who first started focusing on waterbirds focused on a group of ducks, geese, and swans, Anatidae, and those were what they called wildfowl or waterfowl. As the census, the International Waterbird Census, started in the 60s, focused on this group, it was the International Waterfowl Census. But as the program broadened to cover all waterbird species, it then changed its name to the International Waterbird Census. So that's one example. Similarly, the Ramsar Convention, when it was signed, it was considered as a focus on habitats of international importance for waterfowl. But that as well has changed and broadened its definition of waterfowl to mean waterbirds, and that covers any group of birds that are dependent on water for their food, for their nesting, and sometimes they will be at those wetlands for 12 months of the year. Some waterbirds may use the water or wetlands only seasonally, and for example, Arctic breeding birds are in the Arctic area. Some of these areas where they nest are not wetlands; they are the frozen north. So you have areas of wetland within the Arctic, but at certain times they are quite on hilly ground. For example, the great knot, which is found on the coast in Gujarat and parts of Asia, are nesting up in the hills. So it doesn't mean that a waterbird depends on water every day, but as a group, they are largely dependent on water.
Okay, that's a wonderful explanation.
And besides that, it's useful to mention that some people use the word wetland species rather than waterbirds, because in that they include families of birds that are in the vegetation and in the surrounding areas of the wetland. So it really depends on what the purpose is that you have a term. And once people are familiar with that, it's easy to understand.
Okay. So that is quite an elaborative explanation, and I'm quite sure that it will be helpful to our young bird watchers and students and young researchers. My second question, Dr. Mundkur, is about Flyway. And in your topic, the Flyway is also a very, very important term. And I request you to impart some understanding about this term also, please.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good question, because it again is a term that can be used at many different levels. For one, if you have a bird which migrates from its breeding area, which may be in one country, to its non-breeding area in another country, the area that is covered by this annual migration is really the flyway of that bird.
Okay.
It may be one bird, it may be one species, it may be one subspecies, it may be a group of species. So for the term flyway can be used at many different levels. Basically, it's a management approach to conserving migratory species.
Okay.
And collectively, for purposes of management at the international level, for waterbirds, particularly the long-distance waterbirds, we consider 9 global flyways.
Okay.
So the definition of flyway can be at the individual species level, or a group of species, or a much wider group of species, families such as waterbirds. And just to go back to your previous question, if you're talking about flyways of waterbirds, a flyway of waterbirds for ducks, geese, swans, herons, egrets, terns, gulls, storks, ibis, pelicans could be one definition of a flyway.
Okay.
There are different flyways for other species. So for raptors, birds of prey, you may have flyways that are quite different. Or for passerines like sparrows, or we have migratory sparrows that come to India from Central Asia, that may have a limited flyway. So it's a very handy term to use, but one needs to understand the context in which it's being used.
Okay. Somebody had humorously told me that flyways are highways in the sky. So, so I don't completely agree with him, but it's a nice analogy. Anyway, how many flyways are spread over the world? I think you briefly told 9 highways. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So if we consider the world in three large regions, the Americas, North to South America as one geographic area.
Okay. Yes.
The Asia Pacific as one geographic area, and Asia, Eurasia into Africa as the third area. These are the three main flyway regions.
Okay.
Within these main flyway regions, you can divide it into subdivisions or flyways to get to the number 9. So in the Asia Pacific region, we have the Central Asian Flyway and the East Asian Australasian Flyway.
Okay.
What's important to recognize is that these flyways are not separate from each other, but they overlap in the breeding area, maybe also in the staging area where the birds stop on migration. But the terminus of the migration determines the entire length of the flyway. So you have an area of Russia where you've got birds breeding that go into India and then go into Southeast Asia and Australia. And so those become the two flyways in the Asia Pacific, as an example.
Okay.
Similarly, you have flyways on the west coast of Africa, on the east coast of Africa, and in central mainland Africa, let's say. And these become the flyways of the African Eurasian region.
Okay. So suppose I want to decide the importance of certain flyway. Which are the criteria, or which is the only criteria? Is it just waterbird population? Suppose I want to say that the flyway A is more important than flyway B. So what can be the criterion for that?
We could use a number of different criteria, again, depending on the species you're talking about. But it's really a management tool. So then we need to ask the question, what is the purpose for which we are doing the management? Are we protecting the most threatened species and populations?
Okay.
Are we protecting the species which have the greatest abundance? So it depends on how you want to analyze the information that would dictate which becomes the most important flyway. But for example, because we are dealing with conservation of species, the numbers of threatened species and populations is one good indicator of prioritizing flyways.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just now told that there are 2 flyways through India. So which is more important, or is that a valid question? Are both the flyways important, or which is a highly used flyway in India?
Well, in India, because of the shape of India being a conical, ending up with Sri Lanka and the Maldives to the south, the birds that come into this cone and stay here during the northern winter, these are the birds of what we call the Central Asian Flyway. So for India, protecting these becomes the greatest priority.
Okay.
But fortunately, the birds that fly from Central Asia and Russia fly through Western India down to Africa. There are several such species and populations. So protecting those also becomes a priority.
Important. Yes.
Similarly, on the eastern side, the East Asian Australasian Flyway overlaps with Eastern India and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Because those birds which go down into Southeast Asia tend to stop in Northeast India or Northern India on their way south and north again. So that's really how we have 3 overlapping flyways that cover the wide area of the Indian subcontinent.
Okay. What are the latest population estimations for waterbird using flyways through India? Is there any estimate like the maybe latest one?
That's a good question, because there's been research that has helped to produce what we call the waterbird population estimates. And this is a global publication that we as Wetlands International have been putting together. And the last one was in 2012.
Okay.
So that's quite outdated because it's
Yes.
a decade ago. And
Yes.
the information in that, unfortunately, for the Central Asian flyway or birds coming to India, was very outdated. It was information from the 80s, 90s.
Oh,
So
okay.
we honestly don't have a good understanding of the current situation of the estimates and trends
Okay.
of the waterbirds of the Central Asian flyway.
Okay.
We are at the moment undertaking a review of the birds of the East Asian Australasian flyway.
Okay.
And in that case, for example, there are 270 populations of
Okay.
birds, and for about 90%, we have estimates. And those estimates say that we have between 40 and 18 million waterbirds.
Okay. Okay. So,
Yeah, difficult to answer how many birds we have in the Central
okay.
Asian flyway.
I read somewhere that the Wetland International has developed some portal. I saw it on the internet. So,
Yeah.
what is that portal?
Perhaps you're referring to the portal that was launched in June last year. And that is the Waterbirds population portal, which is the new edition of the Waterbird population estimates portal. So it contains information on the world's waterbirds, all the populations of waterbirds that are recognized and used. The information is used, for example, by the Ramsar Convention, are in that portal. Similarly, it gives information on the waterbirds, including the migratory waterbirds that are the focus of the Central Asian Flyway Action Plan or the East Asian Central Asian Flyway Partnership. So it's an information base for anyone around the world to get basic information on the population estimates, trends, and what's called the 1% thresholds for these waterbird populations.
Okay. I have heard the term AWC, or I think Asian Waterbird Census. So can you elaborate on the importance of, I think it is carried out every year, right? So what is the significance of carrying out this AWC every year? And how exactly it is being done by Wetland International? Because Wetlands International has to work on very wide area. So is it, how can it be made possible?
Well, it's an excellent example of citizen science.
Okay.
Is very old. The census, the Asian Waterbird Census, started in 1987, and in South Asia and parts of East Asia, and has since grown. It is organized every January, which is what we consider the peak of the northern winter, when we understand that most waterbirds are not moving around a lot, which means that they can be reliably counted at one time across the region without them moving too often.
Okay.
This is a very simple program.
Okay.
It aims to collect information on the numbers of waterbirds of different species at a wetland and understand what is the situation at the wetland, assess the wetland quality, look at potential threats to the wetlands and waterbirds during a very short visit. So it is a coordinated count, which is coordinated by Wetlands International globally, regionally, but at national level, we build on the strengths and interest of partner organizations who have responsibility and interest to monitor and manage migratory birds, wetlands, resident waterbirds. And so we partner with them, or in some countries, it's just an individual without an organization who is coordinate the counting of the waterbirds, collect the information in a standardized way, and use it for conservation action in the country, or to send it to us to produce regional overviews. Okay.
Is this population estimation carried out during different time spans as far as different flyways are concerned? I think that is a logical thing, right? We can't do census in the same time frame for all the regions, or is it done during the same time slot?
Okay. The International Waterbird Census, which is the global program under which the Asian Waterbird Census is a major part, is aiming to have a snapshot of the numbers of waterbirds around the world at one time period.
That's a wonderful word. It is a snapshot, right?
Yes. Yeah. And that time period is January, February in some countries. So it depending on traditional schemes, their capacities, their interests, and their abilities to count the waterbirds, we encourage counting at the same time.
Okay.
And at the moment, it's happening once a year throughout the world, and that's January. But we have, through our discussions with our coordinators, realized that this does not give us the full picture, obviously, because it's a snapshot at one time of the year. And there is value in increasing the numbers of times that the birds are being counted, possibly up to 4 times in a year, so that the northern winter or January period, December to February, let's say, is one period. And then the northward migration, which is April, May, the northern summer, which is June, July, August, sometime in that period. And finally, a third and a fourth count during the southward migration between September to October. We are still working out the mechanics of how this, but the aim is to better understand the value of wetlands for waterbirds at different times of the year, because birds are not staying there throughout the year. So we need to understand, when do they come, when do they go, how long are they there, and how do they use these wetlands? And this helps to guide management action.
Oh, great. Coming back to India, we have been carrying out this census, I think at least many years. So can you explain about a trend of population for some groups, at least, whether the population is decreasing, increasing, or stable? For example, recently one document has been published, that is State of Indian Birds. It is not by Wetland International, but still it is very useful document which indicates a trend of various species, whether the population is increasing or decreasing. So can Wetland International derive such trend, at least for India? Has it been done using long-term data, at least decades or 2 decades data?
That's a good question, because and it's good that you mentioned about the State of India's Birds, which was produced in 2021. And that was produced by Bird Count India, and Wetlands International and the Asian Waterbird Census is part of this consortium of national organizations that produced this wonderful report. And of course, the information varies depending on species groups and coverage across the country. But in general terms, what it's shown us is that for a majority of the species, we are seeing declines in populations. So there is a declining trend. But for some species, it may not be so bad. For example, the woolly neck stork may not be decreasing, maybe stable, or maybe even increasing slightly. But for a majority of migrants, long distance migrants, ducks and geese and shorebirds, there is a decline for most populations of birds. So that is a matter of concern.
Yeah, it's a matter of concern, right? Coming to the question once again about AWC, approximately how many birders or animators participate in this AWC in India? Some latest estimate will do, just to give an example how popular it is.
Well, we know that the number of people going and participating in the census goes up and down. There's a lot of new interest, people get participate in the census for many years, and then they get busy with other things, and they may
Right.
not continue. And then you get a new group of people who are joining, and you've
Okay.
got many people who have continued for the last 3 decades. So you've
Okay.
got different groups of people participating in the census, and that's important because you've got new participants joining the census. In terms of numbers, it's quite variable, and we are sure that the numbers are well over 1,000 people who participate in the census. It may be close to 2,000 people in some years, maybe
Okay.
more. It's difficult to be exact, and the reason
It is difficult.
we don't get information on every participant who participates.
I agree. Yes. That's right.
Yes.
Can you say which Indian state is more active in this, and where do we need to strengthen our effort?
There are several states where the census has been undertaken in a very good way over the last decades, and I think Gujarat is a good example of where there has been regular monitoring at a number of sites. Other states include Kerala, Goa, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and Telangana. Odisha. So across the country, you've got some good coverage. There are geographic gaps, and we hope that those will be filled in the coming years, because if there's no information about a certain area, those wetlands are not getting the recognition they need at the national and international level. And so we hope that through encouraging people to participate, including through talks like this that you have kindly organized, that people learn about such programs and are interested to participate and contribute to conservation of their birds in wetlands. So people ask me, we would like to participate in Wetlands International's Waterbird Census. I say, no. We together want to participate in the Waterbird Census. We have roles in it. You are out in the field collecting the information, the most important information, without which there is no census. We are helping to pull that information together, to provide the guidance, to summarize that information and make it back, bring it back to you, to be able to conserve your birds and your wetlands together with everybody else.
Okay. Does this AWC take care about habitat aspect of waterbirds? For example, it is. I know that it is very strong in getting population estimates of various species. But does it collect any information about waterbird habitats through its data sheet and something like that? Because bird and its habitat cannot be separated from each other.
You're absolutely right. There is no use, or limited use, let's say, in looking at birds in isolation. You can only conserve nature when you look at it holistically. And if you're looking at waterbirds, then you need to look at their wetlands. And that became very clear early with the census. And since the 90s, the census has depended on two forms. One is the count form of birds, and one is the site form, which collects information on the kind of wetland, the uses and threats to the wetland, and therefore provides a simple assessment of the state of the wetland. This has now been transformed and improved into a Google-based form or an Excel-based form, which collects information on a number of different characteristics about the wetland, the uses and threats. And this helps to, summarizing this helps to identify the main threats and pressures on the wetlands. And provides a basis for conservation action. So when people see that these wetlands are threatened because of pollution or landfill or illegal killing or poaching of the birds, then they can take it up with local authorities to put an end to the destructive practices.
As we all know, climate change is a very big issue nowadays. So I hope this trends of bird population may be able to give some indication about effects of climate change on waterbird population all over the world. Do you think will it happen? Will this Asian wetland count or population estimates anywhere in the world, will they throw light on impact of climate change on waterbirds and waterbird habitats?
That's a good question, and it's one that has been of concern to us for the last decade and more, because we can see, if we look at the information where it has been collected systematically over the last decades, there is quite a change in the distributions of many species and populations. One element is what's happening to the sites, but the other element is what's happening to the broader environment at the flyway level.
Yes.
So we know, and I can use an example of analysis done in other parts of the International Waterbird Census. For example, in Western Europe, we have, through the Waterbird Census, been able to demonstrate that many waterbird populations are moving northeastward, which means they are not migrating as far south and west as they used to. So they seem to be adapting to the changing climate. Basically, further northeast, which used to be colder and frozen with less food resources, is now able to provide the food and conditions that these birds need. So they are not necessarily migrating as far south as they did in the past.
Okay.
We are working with colleagues and university researchers around the world to look at this issue at the global level, and we have published a couple of studies which show similar stories that bird numbers and distributions are changing in relation to climate change or changing temperatures and water distribution. And those studies, we hope in the coming years, will be made available to advise on what actions need to be taken, because what we know is that change is already happening. The question is, how can we adapt to this change such that wetlands can provide the place for birds and for the people who depend on those wetlands?
Yeah. It's just my vague idea. If your data sheet has provision to record temperature or some other climatic parameters, it may help. It may be helpful in the long run. Maybe this climatic parameters and waterbird population can be correlated using the same data sheet. Or do you have already that provision, giving recording temperature, or I don't say about rainfall, but at least temperature during bird observation. So if it can be done, it will be very helpful to correlate temperature and bird population, something like that. Anyway, so just one question more about this AWC, because AWC is being conducted since many years. So what are the strong points of AWC, and where do you think it can be strengthened?
Well, the strength of the AWC is the network that conducts the counts.
Okay.
So the volunteers who go out every year, and these include bird watchers, researchers, conservationists, business people, forest staff from other government departments. So basically, it's open to anyone who has an interest to participate, to go out and count waterbirds and assess the wetlands. So in order to get good information to answer the complex questions you were asking on climate change, etc., we need information collected in a standardized way, reported in a standardized way. So the methodology used needs to be better understood by all participants so that they can see the value of following standard methods that are reproducible year after year to be able to give high quality information.
That's right.
We know that there could be strengthening of the different network groups across the country and the rest of the world. So capacity building is one of the priorities for this, making available information on methodology, providing guidance on how to use it. And once the information is collected, for that information to be put together, analyzed, and made available to everyone so they can see the value of their contributions.
Great. Yes. In the end, Dr. Taej, what message would you like to give to birders and wetland enthusiasts of India? Just last question.
Well, I think India is a very special country because it's been bestowed with a very large diversity of waterbird species, of wetland habitats, and we have over the years seen that it's so special to the local people who depend on these wetlands. And if we can find ways to better manage these wetlands for the benefit of people and birds, then I think these birds have a future, a good, bright future in the country. So I would hope that more efforts can help to conserve and focus attention on wetlands, the threats to the wetlands, and find solutions which are possible in the short term and in the long term. That's going to be critical. I think it's not starting from zero because there's so much good work being done in the country. It's a matter of scaling up this work, joining hands with the different groups of people who are dealing with this, and talking to policymakers to make sure that the right policies are in place at the local, state level, and national level that give recognition to wetlands and associated habitats such as grasslands and forests, because wetlands don't operate in isolation. These are part of a broader landscape, and we need to conserve these broader landscapes to conserve wetlands and waterbirds. We know that egrets, herons, lapwings, and all these species are using the wetlands as well as the large areas of grassland and forest around them. And so we need to think bigger and not in little boxes of sites, but at the broader landscape level.
That's a great message, Dr. Taej. So, Dr. Mundkur, I'm asking one question about Ramsar sites, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. Dr. Taej, as far as I know, today there are about 172 countries in the world which have adopted Ramsar Convention 1971. We call them contracting parties. Now, India is also one of them. And one of the interests of these countries is to declare important wetlands in the respective countries as Ramsar sites or wetlands of international importance. Now, it might not be that easy to declare some wetland as wetland of international importance or Ramsar site. That wetland should satisfy some criteria, right? And I'm wondering, is there any way this AWC is helping us to satisfy one or the other criteria to declare any wetland as wetland of international importance or Ramsar site? So can you provide knowledge in this matter, Dr. Mundkur?
Sure, thanks. That's a very interesting question. And it's really something that goes to the heart of the Waterbird monitoring program of the International Waterbird Census. The Ramsar Convention, as the full title suggests, recognizes the importance of wetlands for waterfowl or waterbirds. And as you rightly said, the convention uses 9 criteria to identify wetlands of international importance. 2 of these directly relate to waterbirds. So a site is considered internationally important if it holds 20,000 waterbirds on a regular basis. That is, annually, if you have 20,000 over the last 5 years, that immediately qualifies to be a site of international importance. Similarly, if a site holds 1 or more populations of waterbirds above the 1% threshold, which is 1% of the population of that waterbird, then it meets the criterion of the Ramsar Convention. So there are two criteria that directly relate to the Ramsar Convention. In addition, if the site holds a significant number of threatened populations, so under the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species, then it also qualifies under the Ramsar Convention. So the Waterbird Census provides government agencies at the state and national level with critical information on the distribution of waterbirds, the numbers of waterbirds at these sites, and through a number of years of collection of the counts, it is possible to assess the international importance of those sites. Because the counts are done in January, they will tell you when the sites are important for waterbirds in one time of the year, in January. And therefore, particularly in North India, there may be more sites which are more important during northward or southward migration. So they may have higher numbers and a wider diversity, a greater diversity at that time. But the census provides a very good basis for identifying important wetlands and then to be planning additional surveys if you would like to assess the importance of those wetlands at other times of the year. And so by using the people who've done the counts at one time, if they are going out at other times, then there's also the advantage of better reproduction in terms of methodology and consistency in data gathering that is important when you're assessing a site for its birds at different times of the year.
Okay.
And the reports of the Waterbird Census over the last decades, governments in many countries, including India, have had access to good quality information on the numbers of waterbirds and have used this as a priority list of sites to then look at what sites should be designated as Ramsar sites. So it's provided a very good basis for prioritization of sites for Ramsar sites, and then to be feeding into other lists, such as the important bird areas IBA program, which then is also used in many countries for identifying important sites. So these programs are not one-off for one purpose, but they work together and then provide the best information that a government can use for designation of Ramsar sites. And the census is ongoing at the moment in 2022. So in Asia, it's from the first weekend to the third weekend of January. So this is the right time to be counting waterbirds, and the information will be useful and will be reproduced on our website before the end of the year.
Okay.
So that new information is available every year on the website.
Okay. I think a very important goal of Ramsar Convention is conservation and wise use of wetlands, right? So sometimes I feel very confused that suppose authorities want to conserve birds at one place, at one wetland, and again, if the authorities want to allow the use of that wetland for fishing or for irrigation and all that, so will not that create some kind of conflicting situation between waterbird conservation and wise use of the, what is that word wise is quite qualitative, isn't it? What is wise? Are there any fixed criteria?
Well, this is
I'm sorry to disturb, but my curiosity is how bird conservation, that is waterbird conservation and use of that wetland can go hand in hand. So how can we do that simultaneously? Thank you.
Well, we know that particularly in countries where there are large populations of people, wetlands have to be managed in a way that people's activities are not detrimental to the habitat and the resources in that habitat and biodiversity. So if the best way to be managing those wetlands is to take a holistic approach. We are managing the wetlands for all their services and functions and for the biodiversity at that site. So we cannot take a single approach to management. So yes, the approach of sustainable use or wise use means that we are looking at that wetland in such a way that our actions today as humans will not negatively impact that wetland. We may take fish, but we should do it in such a way that we are not harming other species. By taking the fish, it doesn't mean that we are killing the crocodiles that may live there, or the dolphins that may live there, or the turtles that may live there. Similarly, we need to make sure that the way we fish does not destroy the habitat or degrade the habitat for the waterbirds that depend on that habitat. So development of management plans which take into consideration the needs of all the stakeholders, birds being one of those stakeholders and fishermen being another stakeholder, only then can we find ways to not have a conflict. And there are many good examples from around the world and from India of how this balance can be found. But it means people sitting together from different fields and different stakeholders and coming up with a joint plan for the management of the area.
In the end, I'm really, really thankful to spare your time on the weekend during Sunday. And I'm pretty sure that your the understanding and knowledge shared by you will be very, very useful for our bird watchers and our young researchers and postgraduate students. So once again, I express my most sincere thanks, Dr. Mundkur. And we assure you that we have been doing this bird censuses very seriously in Gujarat, though this seminar is not about Gujarat, this interview is not about Gujarat. But because I belong to this land, I at least know that Gujarat is very, very sincere about bird censuses. So we will continue that, and the information provided by you will be a very motivating factor for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much once again. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we have regular participation of people across the country in the census into the future, because that's the strength of the census.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks you very much.